Good morning, everybody listening live. Welcome to our final one of this little series, if you like, of our New Way Growth ConeX collaborative LinkedIn live sessions. If you've missed any of the previous ones, they're all available to watch on YouTube. I'll share the link somewhere in this feed as we go. So the reason that we do these sessions are to introduce topics of interest. We put them on for you guys watching live, so please do engage and ask any questions as we go, and we'll make sure we get them across to the panel. So on our panel today, Joe, I'm not going to introduce you. You can introduce yourself in a second, as we'll be jumping straight over to you. We've got obviously Andrew Wilson, as you can see, and Tom Flood from Engineers Insight. And as always, we've got Adam on my side supporting and helping as we go. So the topic today is around funding and finance and bid writing and everything included in that kind of topic. And we've brought obviously Andrea and Tom along to potentially discuss some of their experiences around the topic as we go as well. So as I say, please feel free to drop any questions in the comments as we go, and we'll make sure anyone on the panel gets those directed at them. Adam, is there anything else that you wanted to drop in there before we get going?
No, just kick straight in.
So I will introduce you, Joe, and feel free to take over, whether you want to do a quick introduction, whether you want to jump into some slides or go from there. I do have a couple of questions, but I'll let you introduce yourself first and then we can jump back into those. So over to you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm Jo Derbyshire. I'm Director of Grants and Tenders at Inventia. I started my career working in universities for spin-out companies, and most of the companies didn't have much funding, so I started writing grant applications for them about 20 years ago, and that's something I'm still doing a lot of. So I've written hundreds of grant applications in the last 20 years. And what I want to try and do today is give you just a 5 or 10 minute quick presentation on grant funding and trying to demystify it a little bit, because it is a really sort of complicated landscape. And it takes a while to navigate it and find out where the nuggets of funding are. So, okay, Sam, could you swap me to the presentation then, please? Amazing, thank you. And I can control that. Cool, okay. So I'm just going to quickly touch on what grants actually are, where do you find them, how do you win them, and if you win them, how do you manage them? So grants really are free money. It's not a loan, it's not an investment, it's a grant. They're not 100% funded, so you are required to contribute to the cost of your project. But they are designed to help you as a business invest in sort of the risky, more difficult innovation projects that you perhaps wouldn't ordinarily do in the course of your everyday business. So the government are trying to encourage you to invest in new IP. Many of the grants are linked to net zero. What I will say about the grants is it's free money, but it's not easy money. So they're not easy to get. And then once you secure your grant, you have to manage them properly. So that's something that I'll talk about. So the main sort of providers for grant funding in the UK, Innovate is the biggest funder, Innovate UK. There are also funds from other government departments, so the NHS, for example. There's the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund. So there are different places to look for these kind of grants. European Commission, that's a little bit of an interesting area at the moment for obvious reasons. We are still able to apply to Europe for grant funding at the moment. And then there are also sort of charities that do fund and the local enterprise partnerships or the new version of those, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. So Innovate UK has a huge pot of money, just under 40 billion in the current funding framework, and they announce competitions. At the moment, there are about 45 competitions live on their portal. And those competitions can be for particular themes. So, for example, biomedical catalyst, or they are sort of the general calls such as smart and innovation loans, which you may have heard of. Okay, so I've just mentioned there's a smart competition. So that is for any technology, projects from 100,000 to 2 million. So they can be quite substantial. And then there are innovation loans, which are also the general competitions with supposedly sort of generous interest and repayment terms. So certainly better than you would get, commercially. So what makes a good project? What are the funders looking for in one of these applications? They're looking for things that are sort of game changing, that are genuinely innovative and going to develop something new. They have to be risky and difficult, and that's a bit counterintuitive. So the funders are looking for projects that have the potential to go wrong, is the best way to describe it. So part of the application is quite a detailed risk table with lots of lovely mitigations in about how great you are at mitigating those risky challenges. Return on investment is important. So the whole point of these grants is to make your business more profitable and to generate a decent ROI on the investment that they make. They want to see you basically generating more tax, and wider impact is also an important aspect. So what will the benefits be of this project outside of the business? There is a thing called technology readiness level, which you may come across, and that is a definition about the stage of development of your project. So TRL1 is basically an idea. TRL9 is something that's ready for the market. And Innovate and the European Commission fund things that are around TRL 4 to 6. That's the sort of sweet spot. So it's important to be aware of that when you're applying. An Innovate UK application form has these questions in, which are pretty standard across most competitions. There'll be some additional ones for some competitions, and they're a bit like a business plan. So they're addressing a lot of the things that you would include in a pitch deck or plan. Some tips for winning. Your first page is really important. So you've got to convince the evaluator in that first summary question 1 of your proposition and why it's something that they should fund. Use illustrations if you can. Have a detailed business model. So actually understand who you're going to sell to, how much for, and how many, when. And often we'll see applications where it's sort of made up, and it's okay. Some of it has to be made up, but the more detail and facts that you can include in these applications, the stronger your application will be. Be honest about competing approaches and competitors. So sometimes we'll see clients will say, there are no competitors. There's always something, there's always some way of delivering a need. So it's always better to acknowledge it and show that you understand the market you're operating in. Obtaining letters of intent is really helpful because that shows that there is a demand for what you're developing. Have a balanced team or have plans to get a balanced team. Avoid large subcontracting. So the whole idea with these grants is that the funding goes into your business and you develop your intellectual property and your products yourself rather than with a third party. These are the eligible costs in a grant. So usually the largest one is labour, and then you have 20% overhead on labour. Subcontracting, subject to that caution, not too much. Capital expenditure is sort of relevant because it's not an eligible cost as such, but you can claim the depreciation on capital expenditure. What you won't get in one of these kind of Innovate grants is Innovate paying for a new building. They would potentially pay for a project office, but not a whole building. So that's something we can discuss more. Then you've got materials, travel, a new patent application, and then sort of the other category. So assuming that you get the notification that your project is in setup, which is a sort of 3 magic words that we tend to get on a Friday afternoon, there's a whole level of paperwork that you then have to apply, the second level checks. You're then appointed a monitoring officer who will meet with you quarterly and support you with your project and ensure that things are going as planned. Okay. Here's an example of a project. This is a project that I've worked on myself for about 8 years, actually. This is a company that have a way of micro-propagating sphagnum moss, which is actually something that's really slow growing naturally. They can propagate it in a laboratory, encapsulate it in gel beads, and then these beads can be spread over peatland, for example, and it regenerates the peatlands. And what this company have discovered is that they can really accelerate the growth of sphagnum under certain conditions, and that can be used to create growing media, which is an alternative to peat-based compost. And it also enables farmers, potentially, or landowners with marginal land to introduce a crop that is quite lucrative and also very good for the environment. So this is a great project from lots of different aspects, and has won quite a few grants over the years to fund the development. This is a useful place to look. If you're interested in understanding what's happening in your sector, Innovate publish all the projects they've funded since 2004. So you can do a keyword search and have a look at what other people are doing and who they're collaborating with. So it's a really useful website to have a look at. So that's kind of grants in a nutshell. I didn't really talk about capital grants, and I can talk more about that if there's interest. Capital grants are generally regionally based through, for example, a LEP. The intervention rates are lower, so maybe 30-40% is a typical intervention rate for a capital grant, and they are linked to job creation or retention. Okay, any questions?
Perfect. Thank you very much. Before we start with questions, I'm wondering if it's worth just Adam, Andrew, and Tom asking you guys if you've had any experience with grant funding applications, bid writing, things like this in your line of work. Who wants to
Lots. Yeah. I've got to be honest, over the years, basically every investment decision we take, we basically go looking to see what funding is available first. And the biggest difficulty and the biggest frustration is actually finding the grants, because there is no central place to go to for advice. You end up having to fight or battle between LEP and, for example, it could be a local authority. And as the LEPs sort of are disappearing or moving into combined authorities, that's just going to get worse. The annoyance, like for example, some of the COVID grants towards your business rates, for example, you only hear about them because you're lucky enough to trip over them to somebody else. And it's so frustrating that there's so much support out there, and a lot of it's very, very generous support. But small businesses, SMEs in particular, struggle to actually find it, and that should not be the case. So we've had grants from everything from moving factory to machinery purchases. Our most recent has been 2 capital grants towards machinery, which were COVID recovery grants. We had some money from one of the universities towards a hoist, believe it or not, because it was about improving efficiency. And also a low carbon workspace grant, which I've got to be honest, I find the actual grant application process isn't as onerous as you think. When you first look at the form, you actually do wonder, can I get this done? But it's actually not as bad as it looks if you just take it stage by stage and read the question properly.
That makes sense. I think you touched on quite a big frustration in the manufacturing space, especially SMEs. It's finding them and then having that kind of time and resourced to necessarily do. I think a lot of people are almost put off by thinking, oh, I don't want to go through the grant process. I don't want to do it. I don't have the time to do it. It's going to take me away from my business. When in fact, it may not be that much of a challenge. I think the bigger challenge, as you say, is actually finding what's out there.
Yeah, we ended up with pretty much a year of our business rates funded by a COVID grant, and the application took 12 minutes, 13 minutes.
I think that's the thing with me is because businesses do put up saying, oh, or have this assumption that it does take a long time. But I've turned around and said to him, regardless of whether it took you 5 hours, 10 hours to fill out the application, if you're putting it towards saying a 50 grand, 100 grand towards a capital expenditure, or it's going to bring in anything above the hours that you've put in from a revenue point of view, bloody do it. Yeah. It's not. And I've never sort of, it's like, I don't know whether it's like a procrastination side or a distraction side from actually doing something. I'm not sure, because if it's bringing in money and it enables you to do something else and shift focus elsewhere, supports you thriving, surviving, whatever it is, you do it. I never have got that one, but that's just me, I suppose.
Yeah, ultimately they're there to support businesses, aren't they? To grow.
Yeah.
It's free money. You might as well try and get hold of it. What about yourself, Tom? Have you had experience, or are you thinking about going down that route?
Yeah, so Joe mentioned Innovate Edge on that last. So we're a part of the Innovate Edge organisation, and even through them, we struggle with grants, and then knowing what grants to put us towards and what conversations to have. So I mean, we've had multiple conversations recently, actually, with ConeX University for this Focus Digital and there's proof of concept, and we found ourselves sitting in the middle of both. Proof of concept, which is what Innovate Edge thought we were perfect for, turns out we were too far down the road. We're already in B2, we've got users on the app already. So then you get passed to the next person who looks at you for Focus Digital, and then we're actually too early for that because we need all the feedback from the beta testers to tell us what features we need to build to be able to get the grant, and then that grant runs out at the end of the month. So it's I think partly bad timing. Also, same as what Andrea said, you just don't know what to apply for. That's been our problem. We go to people like Innovate to say, what do we apply for? Because I have no idea, and then they don't have the answer either. So it's not particularly helpful for us as a new business. So yeah, frustrating. I think is the.
Yeah, I think this for me is where some of the disconnect comes. So the grant funding is available. The processes that are put in are not. To be politically, I've said politically, but I'm going to be trying to be correct here. But I'll just say it. Is the people that have dealt with the processes putting in place for the industries and the businesses going for the funding don't understand what is actually required, and also the timing, and also the different phases. So just make something up, and then you've got this mismatch around it. Whereas if it was, and I'm making a big assumption here, industry-led, controlled funding by the LEPs, but industry-led, you might find a different application or a different result and a quicker result from it. That's my opinion. Having witnessed and having gone through it, it's just exactly as you say, and Andrew and Tom have said. I mean, I've got a client that, which is Joe. This is the message I've sent you earlier. Is looking for funding, and we've dealt with some of them, Made Smarter, and the rest of them. And to be fair, have been a shower of absolute, I won't swear, shocking. So yeah, it just and I think you're always going to get that one extreme to the other, and where it all norm sits, but it just seems to be the wrong sort of approach consistently, or the result, and it never seems to go anywhere. And I think that might be a big assumption again here, and I shouldn't do that. Might be some of the frustrations that come from industry with that.
Well, it's like when you look at capital grants, Adam. The government keep banging on, and the mainstream media keep telling us how bad we are at productivity here in the UK. But in order to get a capital grant, you have to show that you're going to increase headcount. Now, most manufacturing businesses, to get capital grant for equipment, you're buying the equipment to reduce the actual labour requirement. So, you know, it's in a complete oxymoron. It just does not make sense. You know, this is why, as part of this, you know, the Support UK Manufacturing sort of initiative, we're saying we don't want more support. We just want actually better support, you know, support that's actually applicable and appropriate to manufacturing businesses, particularly SMEs. You know, it just screams idiocy when you actually look at the fact that, you know, you want to buy equipment, but you have to recruit people to do it.
Yeah, so it's finding a way in which the support can be led around the need of the business, rather than the business having to work out how they can access the funding and kind of shoehorn it into whatever they think will fit, and then ultimately it doesn't fit, or ultimately it's not the right fund, or whatever it may be.
But also, I don't know what's happened to it. I know Lee Rowley, when he was, what was he called for a while? Minister for Industry or something, for a little while. And supposedly he was actually launching a centralised portal for grant funding. What's happened to it, who knows? But, you know, that was the first common sense approach I'd actually seen to any of this, where you could actually put in a central hub, you know, I want support for either digitalisation, or I want support for capital equipment, and then effectively put your postcode in and it'll direct you exactly to where you need to go. That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's funny enough, it's got me thinking of something,
yeah,
to be fair. So, yeah.
Okay.
The one I was going to ask Joe a question.
Into a question, yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I was going to ask Joe a question. So, and this might touch on Yinches as well, and I think we've alluded to some of this. The timing of an application, but there's also with obviously your expertise, which is the actual building of the application. Yinches asked how long does it take to build an application. Now, the thing for me is I always look at what's the utilizing somebody like yourself that knows the process. What sort of level, you know, is it that it makes it a lot easier, and what sort of like the resulting success factor when you utilize somebody with expertise that knows the process, and then how long will that actually take?
Thanks, Adam. That's a good question, or group of questions. So it's interesting what we were talking about earlier about the COVID grants, because at the time of COVID, I had my own business, which has now been acquired. But I remember applying for a bounce back loan on my phone, watching TV, and the next morning the money was in my account. So that's like one extreme, isn't it? To then the other extreme of applying for one of these big collaborative, say European or Innovate grants. You know, they're completely different. And I definitely think, Andrew, there's some learning there, isn't there, about actually making this more accessible. And really, people like me shouldn't exist. You know, these grants, you shouldn't need intermediaries like me to actually access them. It's a bit like the sort of R&D tax credits industry. But if you want to win one of these more complex Innovate grants, you probably haven't got the time, and you haven't got the track record or experience of writing 200 others. So by using people like us, you are at least doubling your chances of winning. And it's a balance for you as a business owner between the risk of that cost of employing people like us, because obviously we're not free, you know, against spending a lot of time and sort of, you know, more likely to fail. So it's a really difficult balance. And I completely understand, having had my own business, you know, you've just got to make a judgment based on your skills and experience and your financial position. You know, if you can afford to get bid writers, that is great. You're going to more likely win. But also it's about sort of being strategic as well, and picking the grants with the best chance of success. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody and talk you through what your options are, you know, that sort of, but really you shouldn't need people like me, and it's something that needs addressing. I mean, I don't even know all the grants, and I'm a grants person. There are thousands, and every company you talk to, it's a slightly different situation, and you need to do a bit of research. We've got a list of all the sort of innovative grants on our website, but that doesn't cover everything. I don't think we could do it, because it varies a lot regionally as well. So I think I've answered the things that you asked me, Adam. Time. How long does it take? Sorry, to write one. Ideally, for a sort of innovate collaborative project, it's 2 to 3 weeks full time writing to do it properly. But ideally, you'd have it over 2 months or so to sort of have some elapsed time and enable you to sort of digest it and improve it and build it. But yeah,
just remind everybody. So on that side, what sort of capital, what sort of grant funding size would you be going for within that application?
So for one of these sort of chunkier innovates, you'd be looking at average 400,000 up to a couple of million. Okay. So if you think about how much time you'd spend chasing equity investment, it's probably not that bad a shout.
No. And what's the usual intervention rate roughly on those bigger ones?
For SMEs, it's 70%.
Okay. On the other side, and the way I look at this as well is that, and probably not everybody looks at this way, but I always look at it from a business perspective. So let's take myself, Andrew, Tom, any of us that we're all running a business. It's not that £400,000 application. It's actually the thing that it's actually going to deliver. So as a managing director, as a business owner, we're responsible for the turnover of that business. So our hourly rate calculates out from the turnover. I look at it from this point of view. So for a business to be going for a 400,000 application and for me to be spending time on doing that application takes me away from a focus of driving revenue within the business.
Yeah.
So it's far better to have somebody that is a master at doing it. Why should I take that skill set away from you and have a go at it myself when you're there and you're good at it, sort of thing? So you might as well bloody use it.
That was my next question, which kind of leads into that. The process that you take, do you expect companies to come to you and say, right, we've found this grant fund, is it something you can apply for us? Or do they engage before that and say, I'm thinking about a grant fund for a project, or even before that and say, I don't know if I want the grant fund, but is there anything available?
It's all of those. Yeah, right. All of those. Quite often a company will talk to us and they're interested in innovation. They've got different project ideas, and we'll spend time going through the ideas and, what would the impact be? What would the benefit be to you as a business? And then trying to work out a strategy based on what's available. And that's quite an important sort of hour spent, actually.
Perfect. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. Which kind of leads on to Sarah Duff's question, and that's quite specific, that she's currently looking for funding for a digital project in Wiltshire. Again, putting you massively on the spot, but it's probably worth maybe messaging Sarah afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
On LinkedIn, you can discuss that separately. Sure. But
there'll be some options, I'm sure.
Is there a lot available at the moment?
Loads.
Yeah,
it's boom time for grants. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a lot available. Yeah.
Is that because is there a reason behind that at the minute?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I'm told that in times of economic stress, governments put more money into this sort of area to help drive the economy, drive innovation.
Joe, the grants that you're looking at, are they match funded or is it pure just free money?
They'll be match funded.
Okay.
So
what sort of the usual?
Yeah. So most of them, they require 30% match funding. So that's not necessarily 30% of the project costs in the bank. It can be, if you're already employing people, you can devote some of that expense to the project. But what you do have to do if you get the conditional offer letter is you do have to demonstrate that you can match fund over the project, particularly for the first quarter. That is quite a complicated area. There are 2 or 3 firms as well that will offer sort of bridge funding to help you with the match so that you can start your project. There are ways to sort of get through that, but it is one of the challenges, especially for small bootstrap businesses.
It's definitely, it's been one of the issues that we've had. You start the conversation on a grant and then all of a sudden you're going to find 40% up front when, it's such an early start like we are. To find 40% of whatever money, 100 grand, 10, even 10 grand. That's someone's wages.
Yeah. And the other thing is that grants are claimed quarterly in arrears. So you've got to fund your first quarter and then reclaim 70% of it.
Yeah.
And that is hard.
That's always not really made sense to me. That hasn't, because if they had the cash in the first place, they're probably using it.
Yeah.
So I've had a few businesses like that thinking, hang on here, mate, how does this bloody work?
Again, Adam, it sort of comes into when you're actually looking at even on the capital grant side. I remember one we were applying for, and basically they said we could only actually, because the grant period was sort of expiring in 4 months, because we were going to be putting the machine on hire purchase, we could only claim the interest for the 4 months. But that wasn't made clear at the application sort of process.
Yeah.
So what we ended up doing was effectively buying it cash and then financing it after we'd bought it cash, or from cash flow, which is ridiculous, because at the end of the day, you're still going to get around it, and they know you're going to get around it. So why don't you just make it easy in the first place? It's not like you're going to default on the hire purchase, and they could put something in the grant to reclaim it should that occur. But it just seems that it's just a ridiculous sequence of events to make it impossible for people to actually apply. Don't get me wrong, there's others that have been so simple it's unbelievable. It's a one-page application, you fill in your figures, you fill in your head count, you say what you're going to do, and the COVID grant for the business rates was one of those. That was, like I said, 10-12 minutes. But I just think they really need to, a bit like Joe was saying, the R&D tax credit thing. We shouldn't need all these fantastic people that are charging between 10 and 25% to help you complete your R&D tax credit applications. We shouldn't necessarily need people like Joe to fill in these grant applications. They need to simplify the terminology, simplify the application process, make sure that it's actually appropriate and applicable to the business that's actually applying, and at a level, when you're applying for a 10 grand grant, you don't want to be filling in 40 pages.
No.
For £400,000 grants, yeah, absolutely, I can understand 2 or 3 weeks of, really hard professional report writing. But there's really got to be some common sense applied to this process.
Do we think it's gonna start to change as the, get this run right, ERDF money starts to disappear, the European funding?
I don't think it's going to get any better. And I think also with the LEPs, basically, local authorities are arguing between themselves about whether they're going to become a combined authority. What happens to the businesses that are right on those borders of these areas? Where are they going to go for that business help and support? Where are they going to go for that signposting? It's personally, I just think the next year or two is quite terrifying unless they get their act together quite quickly.
There was something that, based on that conversation, was something I was going to ask Joe, and my short-term memory is gone, and I've lost it.
While you think about it, I'm going to bring up one of Steve Murphy's questions from before. So he was asking about grants for software implementation. So obviously a lot of what we've talked about is more around kind of products and processes and manufacturing centres and stuff like that. Are there available grants and available funds for to allow companies essentially to implement software?
That's a challenge. Yeah, that's a challenge. So that kind of falls between the stools of developing something innovative yourself, and looking for sort of capital grants. So software obviously is always challenging. Whether there would be anything in the sort of local authorities to help, there are sort of some supports, aren't there, for companies to digitalise. So that would probably be the place I would look for support there. But I don't think that would fall within Innovate scope or the European Commission.
Yeah, I think there's the help to go digital, isn't there? But from my understanding, it's limited to sort of like CRM systems and even things like MRP system. I don't think they've really gone into that as yet within that. I'm not sure on that, but that's some feedback I've had. The question that I was going to ask Joe was, and this comes around from what Andrew was talking around with the LEPs and the, and the funding and where do you go, the EDRF. It's transferring over or transitioning into the shared prosperity scheme, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
Now, from what I understand, and this is what the question I was going to ask, I'm understanding that this now is actually the council's allocation of that shared prosperity, and that fund can be utilised how they see fit. So if it is from a business perspective, looking at a very selfish sort of approach, if they need it to fund projects for the general populace in the local area, that funding could be used there and not actually go to business. Now, that's what I understand.
I think you're right, Adam. Absolutely. So, the shared prosperity funds are sort of devolved funding, and the regions will sort of develop their own plans for distributing that funding. So I'm working on a few shared prosperity applications, and they are actually mostly targeted at businesses, albeit with additional benefits for the community and inclusivity and digitalization actually is a lot of it. But yeah, it's going to vary enormously. But I actually think it might lower the barriers to accessing funds because there'll be more discretion within the region. So I see it as a good thing.
Yeah, I for certain regions, like if local to me, Northampton, around that, they're quite proactive. I mean, I know your Loughborough market, Bosworth. I think they're very, very proactive, very, very business, pro-business as well.
Yeah.
But I think some of the other areas, because there's no two ways about it, there is a click within some of them. And somebody's asked a question around, I think it was Richard Taylor was asking around these collaborative partnerships. And if you are working with somebody and you engage with somebody, and I'll use Made Smart, we're not talking about Made, I'll just use Made Smart as an example. If you engage with them, but you're already working with that client, Made Smarter then try and force the three that they, partners that they deal with, they collaborate with, onto them, and then exclude you out of it. And there's almost like this click within there as well. So they have their favoured. Now, I'm not saying that is Made Smarter. I'm just using Made Smarter as an example, and that's what I've certainly come across, and that has stopped. And we've spoken with our customers around this, and that stopped the customers actually moving forward with or actually looking at any of the funding because they've seen it as well. I've had that one recently, and it's stopped them going for it, unfortunately. So. But I don't know whether that is the case. You might not see that from your side.
I haven't seen that particularly, but I can see how it would appear that way. Maybe it is the case. I wouldn't want to get into specifics. Personally, I think that Innovate, for example, do a great job. They're sort of they're constrained in resources, and the people working in Innovate that I've met are genuinely trying to do good things for businesses. So, yeah, but obviously there are always going to be issues, aren't there? And clicks, but I've never seen that myself.
What's your approach to kind of organisations that come to you with collaborative partners?
Yeah,
do you have people that you suggest if they don't come with partners, or how does that work?
Again, it's similar to before, Sam, that any of the above apply. So often clients will have a consortium in mind, or maybe an end user customer, which is brilliant because it does add to the likelihood of winning. And we can also look for partners. So we and other grant writers will have databases. We've got about 10,000 companies on our database, and we know lots of universities, and we'll use our black book to try and help build your consortium for you. So.
Brilliant. Has anyone else on the panel got any more questions for Joe?
Not for Joe, but I was going to reply to Sarah's about the Swing grant platform.
Yes.
I'm not sure if she meant Swoop. If it's the Swoop one, I was asked to sort of do like a little trial if it's the one I'm thinking of, and I'm pretty sure it is. And I got to be honest, I felt after I tried to complete their initial stages, I then got sold to quite hard. So it was one I came straight away from. I'd rather go hunt myself or use my lovely network and my fantastic connections through ConeX and LinkedIn to find the grants myself.
Adam and Tom, did you have any last comments to make?
Yeah, I mean, slightly selfishly for me, it'd be good to. I think Stephen Murphy's put another comment because we sort of fall in the same category as Stephen, although not directly building software for manufacturing, but we're building software for manufacturing as a whole. And that's been one of our struggles: is where do we fit? Because whatever grant we've looked at can't give us the money to develop anything, especially because everything we do is in house. So the grants want us to get third parties on board, and then that's where you would spend your money. We can't use it internally to pay our own software engineer or develop it ourselves. So it's sort of, I suppose my question is, what do we do? Is there anything else for software companies that would help?
Shall I answer that, Sam?
Yeah, go ahead. I had a follow-up question to that, but
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, you can actually apply for these Innovate grants as a software company. I think the key thing is to articulate that you're doing something innovative. But software is definitely eligible, and quite a few of our companies that are software-based win grants. The challenge is evidencing the innovation. So you probably aren't going to have a patent application. It's all about trying to articulate that message, and it's just a little bit more difficult than, say, if you were developing a new robot. But yeah, you certainly can apply, and staff costs are probably the main cost actually, and would be eligible. So whilst we've talked about building consortiums, and that can be a good thing because you can build the whole supply chain into your project, you don't have to. You can apply as a single entity.
Are Innovate, off the back of that, are Innovate open to kind of suggestions for competitions? So could, say, we get 30, 40, 50 software companies together who all haven't been able to access funding and go to Innovate and say, look, there's a need for this level of funding. Is there a way we can? Yeah,
I'm sure they would be. I mean, I don't know the timescales for that. But I'm sure that they will be very interested in, they'll have technology leads in all the different sectors, and building a relationship with that individual is a useful thing for you as a business, because you'll also get to know what's likely to come up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that's something that we look at doing, all those software people out there. Anyone else got any final comments or questions? No? Shaking of heads. Brilliant. Well, we'll bring this one to an end. Very quickly, Joe, how can people get in touch with you?
So Inventia website, my email is j.derbyshire@inventia.com. So or LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'll ask you to run through the comments on this call as well, and answer any of those that we may have missed out. So obviously, thank you everyone for listening. That's been a very good session. Lots of engagement, lots of questions, which is nice. If you want to learn more about what we're doing at ConeX, feel free to get in touch with me, and we'll jump on a call and we'll chat more about it. How we're kind of supporting manufacturers with bringing together a like-minded community to boost the sector and have the important questions and discussions such as this one.
I've got one quick question. Very, very quick, just for you, because I've just thought of it, and I'm sorry to keep everybody. Innovate UK, 50 billion funding. What's the return on investment they've had so far? I reference that 40 billion. Do you know? don't know.
We should ask
I
them.
was intrigued. I was intrigued
Yeah.
to see if that 40 billion, what's actually been the return on investment from
Yeah.
the industry.
They will be monitoring that, but I don't know the
find
answer.
that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to know what that is actually. Let's find that out. Yeah, so thank you everyone for watching. Our next one will be in a couple of months. I think we're going to have a bit of a break because there's a webinar in May that we're doing separately. So we will be back in a couple of months. As I say, all of these, a few people asked about how they can rewatch them. They're all available on Adam's LinkedIn feed or the ConeX YouTube page in a couple of days' time. So feel free to watch anything back there. And yeah, thank you, Joe, for being such a valuable insight. And obviously, thanks, Tom and Andrew and Adam, for your experience.
Thanks, Anne.
No worries. Thank you all.
Bye.
Okay.